Hello, students. How are we doing? I hope we're all having a terrific Friday or whenever you're watching this. This is the recording for week 4 for U.S. history. We are going over the beginnings of the colonies. Last week we discussed Columbus, we discussed De las Casas. So I'll be going over a quick overview, and then we'll get into our new materials for this week. Just as a reminder, I apologize, I can't be there in person for this week. If I ever have to miss a class, this will be most likely how you will be receiving your lectures for this week in a pre-recorded video setting, which I will send to you at some point in the week. This week may be a little early. I may send it out on Wednesday, but feel free to watch it either on your own time or for certain groups. If you meet together, feel free to watch it together as well. And just as a brief overview of how to go about these pre-recorded lectures, feel free to pause it. You will all have the link to this, so if you're in a group setting and you don't feel comfortable pausing it in front of everyone to take notes or anything like that, feel free to, when you come back home, you can rewatch this, pause it, take notes. We will be going over some slides today, so you can go relook at the slides and everything like that. Make sure you're taking good notes because this information will be on the midterm and possibly final. So make sure you're taking good notes, and let's get started here. Oh, wait, pull up my notes real quick, and then we will get started. Okay, so this week we are talking about empires and colonies, right? So just a quick overview of what we talked about last week, right? We talked about the beginnings of America, right? So we talked about how it was that the first natives really came to America, right? We talked about the Ice Age, we talked about the hunter-gatherers, and what do hunter-gatherers do? They hunt and they gather, right? So if you're hunting, you follow the food. Um, and they went over from, most historians believe they traveled over during an ice age when the land bridge was created between what is now Russia and Alaska. And that is how a lot of natives came into America, right? We talked about how they progressed as a society, why they progressed not necessarily slower, but differently than Europe, right? It's because human beings evolved based off of necessity, right? And so there was less of a necessity for industrialization among the natives. That is why the Europeans and natives progressed differently as time went on. We also talked about once Columbus got there, we talked about Columbus's experience, why his voyage was so successful, what were the dangers with it, and then also what were the reasons behind it, right? What would a European country's reasons be for expansion? Those including political reasons, religious reasons, economic reasons, of course, military reasons as well, right? And then at the end of class, we discussed a little bit about De las Casas, Bartolomé de las Casas, who is commonly known, for his advocacy of the native people, right? Now there are some question marks in some of his theories and some of his teachings, but he's commonly known to be one of the greatest sympathizers with the natives and advocates of the natives and kind of the father of the human rights movement in the Western world as well. We talked about him versus De las Casas as the beginnings of the colonies progressed, right? So that's where we left off last week, right? We left off at the beginnings of the colonies. And so today, what we're going to be discussing is we're going to be discussing empires and colonies, specifically what the difference is. Today, we're going to be going over a lot of important terms to know about when it comes to the beginning years of America. So let's define some terms real quick, right? So when we go to the next slide here, let's define some terms, right? So these are some important terms that you should be taking in your notes, some important terms that we will come back to over and over again when it comes to the colonies. So first and foremost, what is an empire, right? So as you can see here, it says a country that is expanding past its original borders, right? So that is the definition of an empire. Certain countries, certain political, uh, certain governments in countries, they necessarily have to be empires in order to sustain itself. Other countries do not have to, right? But technically, the definition of an empire, right? We throw around the word really willy-nilly quite often, but the technical definition of an empire and what we'll be using for this class is a country that is expanding past its original borders, right? So let's use Great Britain, for example, in this sense. The colonies eventually will be part of Great Britain, right? The American colonies, that is. Great Britain expanded exponentially, right? They expanded to South America, to Africa in certain points, to Australia, to India, right? They set up little colonies, right? And the time when Great Britain became an empire was when they first set their first flag in a foreign land and claimed it for their own, right? And so that is when a kingdom becomes an empire, right? That's when a nation becomes an empire, when you expand past your original borders. So something to ponder. Maybe if you're with others or by yourself to ponder, is America an empire today, right? Have they expanded past our our natural borders? So you can discuss that today's class. Maybe next week we can discuss that in person as well. So that's an important distinction for an empire. A motherland, this is kind of getting into, so after you have become an empire, what your natural homeland is called is the motherland, right? So motherland is the country that colonies come from, right? So if we're looking at Columbus, right? Columbus sails and places his flag for his motherland, right? Right when he places that flag in the ground, the country that the flag is placed for becomes an empire, or is already, in our case, already is an empire, and he claims that land for the motherland back home, right? Whether that be Portugal, Spain, France eventually, Britain eventually, right? Those then become a motherland. That's how we refer to that nation back home, is the motherland, right? Colonies. So colonies, as I'm sure you are aware, we've been using that term a lot. Colonies are the expansion of that country, right? The expansion of the motherland. So the U.S. is at this point a colony, right? They land in Cuba. We've been reading of Columbus's voyage to Cuba. Cuba would be a colony at this point, right? The expansion of the motherland. The natives, as I'm sure you're aware, are the key term. Natives are the people who are living on that expansion of land, right? That colony are the people who are already living on it, while the colonists are the people from the motherland who come to the colonies, right? Pretty self-explanatory, but it's important to know, to define our terms a little bit, right? So there are a couple things we need to know when it comes to these terms right here. And there are a couple different things. One, that so empires are inherently colonialist, right? That means that you can't have one without the other, right? You can't have a colony without the motherland being an empire, right? And you can't be an empire without the motherland also having colonies, right? So you can't have one without the other. Another important thing to remember is that colonists um, can be connected to the motherland in various ways, right? There are multiple different ways that the people who come from the motherland can be connected to it. Now, this includes politics, this includes religion, economics, military, race. All of those can be various factors for why. When we talk about the pilgrims coming to America, right? They have a different reason. They have a different connection to the motherland. They still are connected to the motherland of England, right? But they have a different connection to the motherland than say Columbus or let's say De las Casas, right? They have different connections. So colonialists come over and they have different connections to the motherland, whether that be religion, politics, economics, military, race, example, right? So those are the key terms to know for this lecture, right? And moving forward. Now, going on to the next slide, there are three distinct types of colonies that we need to talk about, right? So the terms that you heard before, you probably knew most of them, or a version of most of them, right? These will most likely be new terms to you, right? Or the description of them will most likely be new terms to you. So the three types of colonies that we will talk about in this class that are important are tribute colonies, plantation colonies, and Neo-European colonies, right? So pause me if you need to write these down and everything like that. There's a lot of information on each of these. That's why I didn't give descriptions of each on the slides themselves. But if you need to pause it, make sure you're taking notes on these next couple parts, right? We'll be going through them one by one, starting with tribute colonies, right? So tribute colonies, the key important factor in tribute colonies is that they rely on the labor of colonial land to benefit the motherland, right? So they rely on colonial labor. So the colonists come to the land, they start working the land, and then they bring back land, or they bring back the benefits to the motherland, right? So the example, the Spanish colonies in the New World, this is an example. They're meant to, the reason for tribute colonies are multiple different reasons, right? They are one meant to explore new lands, like we see with Columbus, meant to bring home riches, right? And to spread religion, right? So explore new lands, bring home riches, and expand religion, right? Those are the three main reasons for a tribute colony, right? There's kind of an underlying impulse with a lot of tribute colonies, and we see this with the colonies set up by Columbus, and the Spanish and the Portuguese, is that there is a civilizing impulse, right? They come in and they want to civilize the natives, right? We see that in almost all tribute colonies, a civilizing nature, a civilizing impulse, as well as a missionary impulse, right? Even if their main reason for setting up a tribute colony is not to spread the religion, there is an impulse towards a missionary ideology. There's also a third impulse that is very key with tribute colonies, and that is while their sole purpose, unlike other ones that we will talk about, while their sole purpose is not to just bring benefits to the motherland, there is also a great amount of loyalty to the motherland, generally speaking, in tribute colonies, right? So they are not like, for example, they are not like the pilgrims that we'll talk about in a few weeks, where they kind of want to separate themselves from the motherland, right? They generally have a very, very strong impulse to loyalty, right? They are, generally speaking, about 75% of the colonialists and tribute colonies are single men, right? So they, naturally speaking, when you bring a lot of single men to a new community, they generally tribute colonies start to explode with mixed race people, right? They start mingling with the natives, right? And so they start settling down. Tribute colonies are not as permanent, right? They didn't come to set up new nations, right? They came to, like we said, explore, extract the riches, and bring religion, right? So they're not as permanent. That is why you don't see families necessarily being brought across on tribute colonies. So yeah, they're 75% single men, and so they start mixing with the natives a lot of times that you'll see. Then tribute colonies are generally often temporary establishments, right? So, and they'll build the roots, so they don't come expecting to build roots in this community, but they build roots in the community if they see that where they land is a good place to settle down, right? But it's more often than not, it's a temporary colony, as we see with the Cuba expedition that we read about, or that we will read about this week. So that's tribute colonies, just to give a quick overview. Tribute colonies rely on the labor of colonial land to benefit the motherland, right? So they're there to explore, bring riches, and bring their religion. They have a they have a civilizing impulse, a missionary impulse, and a loyalty impulse to their nation. They're mostly single men and most of the time temporary, right? So pause me if you need to. That's tribute colonies. Okay. Plantation colonies, going down. Plantation colonies are slightly different. Okay. What plantation colonies do is exactly how it sounds. They're there to settle the land, right? Their main purpose is to build wealth to benefit the motherland. Okay. So they settle the land and their main only goal is to build wealth, right? And most of the times we see with plantation colonies is that they settle a land and they have one goal of building that wealth, right? Farm whether that is to farm corn or that is to mine silver from Argentina, um, or it's, the Portuguese in Brazil, it's finding the sugar cane, right? They're generally there for one reason and one reason alone. So they extract certain substances from those colonies, right? Whether it be grain, gold, people, right? See a lot of that in the colonies in Africa, right? The main export they're looking for is slavery, right? And so that would be plantation colonies where they go in for one export, generally speaking, for the majority of the times, and their one goal is to benefit the mainland. Okay. So they're based on a place where there's one density of a crop cache, right? So high density of natives, high density of corn, high density of sugar in Brazil, all these things. Tobacco in North America, right? With the English, the tobacco plantations, that would be a plantation colony, right? The beavers in Canada with the French. The French set up plantation colonies for the sole purpose of gaining wealth through beaver skins, right? That we'll talk about later. So some key defining elements of these. Generally, they're more long-term, right? They're more long-term than tribute colonies because they're there to stay and build that one commodity until that commodity runs dry, right? Is lots of labor needed, right? So this is where we see a big influx of slave labor coming in and the natives falling into slavery as well from their European counterparts is there's a lot of labor needed to extract those resources from a particular colony. And so this is where we really see the introduction of slave trade in the colonies is through these plantation colonies, right? Because of the amount of labor that's needed. They have a certain sense of loyalty, well, obviously because their one goal is to provide wealth um, for the motherland, right? But maybe not as much of a loyalty that as the tribute colonies, but still a good sense of loyalty and a certain sense of missionary purpose, but not nearly as much as the tribute colonies. Okay. So that's the plantation colonies. Real quick overview. They're there to settle the land and build wealth using extracting one certain substance from the land, whether that's grain, whether that's natural resources like coal or gold, or that's even people, right, with the slave trade. They generally go somewhere where there's one particular density of crop. So, like I said, sugarcane in Brazil, tobacco in North America, beavers in Canada, right? They need a lot of labor and hence the slave trade and hence the slavery of the native people as well. That's plantation colonies. Neo-European colonies, right? These are really, really simple one, right? Um, Neo-European colonies have one goal in mind as well, and that goal is to basically take a copy and paste of the motherland, right? They're trying to copy the motherland in every way. So while tribute colonies are there to do certain adventurous activities like explore, like bring missionary work, yes, bring back wealth, they have all those goals, and plantation colonies just have one singular goal, and that's to bring wealth. Neo-European colonies are completely different than them because Neo-European colonies just want to expand the motherland. They want to literally copy and paste what the motherland is doing in this new community, right? So we see that with the Pilgrims coming into um, the now US, right? They are a group of people who are coming from a motherland to a colony to set up a similar colony as the motherland, right? With a few tweaks most of the time as well, as we see with the Pilgrims. But their one goal is to copy the motherland, right? And so with these, some key factors that you'll generally see with Neo-European colonies is that this is when you see families, right? This is when you see families coming over from the motherland. So with the plantation colonies and the tribute colonies almost always only men. Plantation colonies, mostly men, some rich families who need to run the plantation colonies, right? But mostly, again, just these men. And then Neo-European colonies are almost all families, right? A lot of young families because they need to grow their own population, right? And so they bring over a lot of women. There's still more men than women, as is a very recurring theme for the colonies. But one of the key characteristics is that family. This is when we see the first introduction of families coming into the colonies. So those are the three different kinds of colonies that we'll be discussing today. So, or in the future weeks as well. So tribute colonies, right? Explore, expand, and bring back wealth, right? Those are the three. You know about that. Plantation colonies, bring back wealth. That is all they do, right? And then Neo-European colonies, copy and paste from the motherland, more or less, right? So those are our three colonies. So let's look at British colonies. There we go. British colonies, for example, is what we're going to be focusing on mainly, right? So for our purposes, we will focus on British colonies the most. By the mid-17th century, English colonies had been established, right? You get the Pilgrims, you have other certain colonies popping up with British descent, right? And one thing that is really important and a key term to understand, let me just take a sip of my water real quick, is the term mercantilism, right? So mercantilism is an economic structure, or is the economic structure between the motherland and the colonies. And the key aspect of mercantilism is that everyone benefits, right? Everyone benefits, both the motherland and the colony benefits from mercantilism, right? So you get raw materials sent from the motherland. So let's use tobacco, for example, in the Americas, right? You get the raw materials of the tobacco getting sent back to England, to the motherland, that is then produced and put in for use, right? That is then produced and then brought out to the general public, right? So it's that yin and yang that kind of starts mercantilism and is the thriving economic structure of colonies, right? That is why they're there, whether it's a near European or a plantation colony, right? Every colony um, exists within this mercantilism structure in one sense or another. Now, other certain colonies, like plantation colonies, will experience mercantilism much more than a neo-European colony, right? But there are some risks that are involved with this kind of structure, with this kind of economic structure, right? So let's think about those risks right now. What is a problem with a mercantilist system where the colonies get the raw materials and bring it back to the motherland for it to be produced, right? What's a problem with that? Well, you all can't answer me because it's a video lecture, but think about that, right? So to give some examples of some risks. So farmers risk the unpredictability of growth in this new land, right, in the colonies. and they have to pay for transportation fees, right? They have to pay for the dangers of transportation, pirates and storms, right? Dangers of transportation. They have no means of production, right? They have to pay tariffs on the water, which is sea taxes. Think of tariffs as sea taxes, right? So all of these risks that the colonies are taking to get their stuff, to get their raw materials to the motherland, right? And then the merchants in the motherland, on the other hand, also have to take risks because the merchants in the motherland, they are not going to be able to produce and sell until the goods get to the motherland, right? And so you have a certain amount of dependency on the stability of the colonies, right? So if a colony, let's say a colony has a terrible, terrible, an early winter and all the crops get destroyed, right? That is not only going to affect the colony because they can't then produce the amount of grains needed to ship to the motherland. It's also going to affect the motherland at home because if there's no products to produce, then workers are in the factories are not going to be able to work, right? You're not going to be able to sell. And so there's a codependency on each of them, right? And so it got to the point with British colonies that Britain became 100% reliant on on their commerce for success, right? They became 100% reliant on their colonies because they had so many, on their colonies sending them raw materials for them to make, so that it got so bad that if there was a bad year or something happened, let's say all your ships got sunk in a terrible storm or something like that, that would majorly affect the British economy, right? So much so that we see this happening in the French Revolution, where in order to stop England from growing, all the French need to do is just surround the island and make sure nothing comes into the island, no raw materials come into the island, and England is going to implode on themselves, right? Because they're completely reliant on the colonies. That will come into play in a couple of weeks in the American Revolution, right? So, if they don't grow anything, then if they don't grow anything in the motherland, right? It's all factories in England, right? So they don't grow anything in the motherland, so they have no raw materials. All they have is manufacturing to manufacture the raw materials sent from the other places. And on the other hand, the colonies have no way of manufacturing the raw materials. So they could be stuck with a bunch of raw materials, but have no way to get it to the motherland, and they have no way to manufacture them. So there's basically useless goods, right? Do you see the problem here? There's a lot of risks playing a part as we head into the to the 18th and 17th or 17th and eventually 18th century. So it's really reliant on a lot of factors that are out of their control, right? Talk about land, we talked about nature with the storms, we talked about um, being reliant on, you're reliant on a economic structure that spreads across the entire globe, right? Whether I make money as a colonist completely depends on how much you, as the British manufacturer, can sell my goods for, right? And so there's a lot of undercutting, there's a lot of shady business going on. And it's ripe for some change, especially in the British colonies. So that is kind of the undertone of the British colonies at this time. So if we're looking at just looking at the timeline of governing the colonies, right? There are three major phases in the governing of the colonies that we need to talk about for this week. Number one is so up till the 1760s, sorry for the typo there. Let me fix that real quick. You can tell I auto-transcribed it. So up till the 1760s, the colonies were mainly self-governed, right? So governments established individually that resulted in very different structures among the colonies, right? So the governments among the colonies varied widely. And they were mainly left to their own accord, right? Until we get to the 1680s, right? Let me change it real quick. There we go. Until we get to the 1680s, what happened in the 1680s is a glorious revolution. What the glorious revolution was an economic upheaval was a systematic upheaval of the British governmental system at the time, right? It was not a true revolution with bloodshed and everything like that. It was they call it the Glorious Revolution because no one died, is what they say. Now, a lot of people died because of it. But it reduced colonial autonomy. So colonial autonomy basically means that gift that the colonies had been given to generally govern themselves, right? So it really reduced colonial autonomy, and the power started to shift in the 1860s. The power started to shift away from the colonies and towards the king and towards parliament. Or, sorry, after the Glorious Revolution, the power started to shift away from the king towards parliament, right? And so while the king had the power, the colonies could, generally speaking, fend for themselves, right? But parliament came in after the Glorious Revolution and decided, no, we are going to start taxing the colonies. We need to start getting more money than just the raw materials from these colonies, right? They are extensions of ourselves, therefore they should start acting like it essentially with them. So that is what's happening in the beginning of the 1860s, right after the Glorious Revolution, right? And so let me just put my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything real quick. Yeah, so what the Glorious Revolution essentially did was it created a parliamentary supremacy, is what we call it, where the king still has power, but just a limited amount of power, right? And it also secured a Protestant succession of the throne is another thing that it did. So, and at first, the colonies they supported the Glorious Revolution, right? Um, until they thought it would be good, right? Because what the colonies did is they generally speaking spread out their governmental system, right? They did a more diplomatic or a more democratic system. And what they thought was that Parliament, the implementation of Parliament, was going to do the same thing, the power to the people. However, what started happening is Parliament started enacting new laws on the colonies that made the colonies feel like they weren't treated as equals, right? And the problem was not only did they enact new laws, then Parliament started to send people over to the colonies to start enforcing these laws, right? And so this colonial autonomy started really decreasing after the Glorious Revolution. So Parliament began for colonies that did not listen to the new laws, did not listen to the new taxes. Parliament began revoking colonial charters, and for companies who weren't loyal, and appointing local officials, right? So they basically, in certain areas like Boston, for example, they started saying, you are no longer allowed to ship your goods across the seas. Now, what we know about with mercantilism is that's a huge, huge hit for cities who have no way of manufacturing their goods, right? All they do is collect the raw materials and send them over to be manufactured. But if you're not allowed to send them over anymore, that's going to hit your economy like crazy, right? So that was what was going on in the 1860s. And then we get to the early 1700s, and Parliament starts to back off a little bit. There starts to be this third phase, which is called salutary neglect towards the colonies, or another way of saying it is a friendly neglect. So the colonies assemble assemblies, form the most wealthy people to control the governments, or the politics of the day, right? They're convinced that they're the voice of the people, right? So the colonies kind of set up their own like mini parliaments almost. And Parliament back in England starts to allow this. They start to say, you know what, we know you guys are now under control after we've sent troops over to make sure you guys are under control. Now we'll let you kind of do your own thing, kind of set up your own systems of law within them. And they saw themselves as equal to the House of Commons, right? They saw themselves as equals, the colonies equals to the motherland. However, as we will see in the coming weeks, that is not entirely true, right? And so this is where we'll leave off for the remainder of this class, and we'll get into next week, is this state of salutary neglect, this friendly neglect, after the craziness of the 1860s and the Glorious Revolution, there was a time of enacting new laws and becoming really strict about these new laws, and then they started to back off again, right? And so you think, okay, everything's gonna be totally fine. They are trusting, quote unquote, trusting the colonies to do what is right, right? At this point. And of course, nothing bad is going to come of it, right? Right? Yeah, exactly. So that is where we'll leave off for this week. Make sure you took good notes and pause it. Come back to me if you have any questions. I think this is a little shorter than normal ones, but I did not have the distraction of all y'all lovely faces interrupting me and asking all these beautiful questions. But so it was a little quicker than normal, but that's okay. It was the same amount of information. So make sure you're pausing it, make sure you're taking good notes. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. But that is what we going over for this week. Next week will be I'll kind of do a quick run over of what we talked about, just so we can be in person. If you have any questions, you can ask me then. And then we will get to the creating your own colony competition that we have been teasing for the past couple weeks now. So exciting. I can't wait for it. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Make sure to submit your quizzes before 11:59 Central Time on Friday. And I look forward to seeing you all next week and grading your work over the weekend. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you.